I got this thing hot and realized my... Okay, sorry about that. I got my timer on my phone, and I know I'm going to be horrible at counting this thing down. And so... yeah, what's up, guys? Hope y'all are doing well. Gonna get Earl on here in just a minute. We're gonna talk some shit for a little bit, see how things go, tell everybody about all the stuff I got going on at the moment, because I feel like we got a ton of stuff going on right now. And yeah, nice, heat it up. This is I've had this little guy for a while now. What the fuck does that? Hey, what's up, everybody? There we go. There's Earl. What was it called? Garlic cocktail, which I think was the most across.
What up, man?
Yeah, so, man, I'm doing this on my 5G, so hopefully this works out.
Yeah. No worries.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Good, man. How about you?
I'm good. Been busy. Finally almost caught up. Like 80, 85, 90% caught up. So,
that's
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, just finally trying to get on the other side of all these orders and everything and getting caught up with freebie packs and just giveaways and stuff like that. That's pretty much what I got left. But I'm probably 90% caught up at this point. Yeah.
Have people been loving your terp packs? I saw you were putting like similar terpenes and packs together and shit.
Yeah, I had that idea a little while ago, and it was one of those that I kind of sat on until I felt like I could kind of flesh it out and do it right, you know? And because I knew it was one of those, as soon as I put it out, I'm going to see 5 other people do it like that. Because it's such a good idea. Like, you know, everybody hits me up and they're like, well, I'm into this, or I'm into, you know, what do you got for gas, or what do you have for citrus, or, you know. And so kind of having that all in one place where I can just go, look, we got a pack just discount. So it's like, you know, it's $120 when you're getting 3 packs of seeds. So it's buying the bags, which is, and those have been huge. People are loving those. Like those, because it's kind of similar. It's $100, but it's guaranteed $210. But you might get 10 packs. One kid bought 2 bags. I think he was one of the ones. We do them all at random, so we up all the bags, and then we just package them with a shipping label. And so we don't know who gets what, but you can either get between 3 and 10 packs of seeds. And so somebody ends up getting, you know, a huge haul of seeds every single time we do those. And those have been big too.
That's cool. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just
fun,
trying to put genetics into people's hands, man. I mean, like, real is my stuff's always been super affordable. When we do stuff like that, we're able to, like, you know, kind of give back, and somebody ends up hitting the lottery every single time and getting, you know, 10 packs of seeds. I think, like I said, one dude bought 2. He got 3 in one and 10 in the other. That's, you know, 13 packs of seeds for $200 is a pretty damn good deal.
Yeah. It doesn't get much better than that. Especially good, tested, fucking different, not the same cuts everybody else is running. Like,
yeah.
You know.
What have you been up to, man?
Yeah. Not shit. Dude, I've been busy as fuck lately. I've always traditionally run 1/10 that I make seeds in, so I started a second one, so now I got two of these bad girls running. I ran my first one for the last, I don't know, 3 years maybe. So excited. When I started getting on those autos I talk about every now and again, I was like, I need a whole space for these. Like, I'm not going to share space with my photos. So
You
been
do
running
both?
that, dude.
You
Yeah, yeah.
do seeds of both?
Yeah, I do both. I use my autos in my photo hunts when I have the low lady count. So the reason I ever started is because I did this. I got russets a couple years back and garden up. Restarted cuts that I dipped and did everything that I thought I needed to. Caught them again, never got rid of them. So I restarted again and I was like, fuck all this. I'm running seeds. And so I ran it was like 160-ish, 150 or something seeds. I can't remember the exact number, but I got 32 females. And I was like, what the fuck? What am I going to do with it? Like, and so, because I was expecting at least 80, and
Yeah.
hoping for. And so I had autos around, and I was like, fuck it, I'm going to pop them. 75 days. I run this 70 days anyway. Yeah, they're, 10 days in right now, but a couple weeks longer, and I won't have to, waste 3/4 of my room or start anything new or anything like that. I've been running with them ever since. I use them like that a lot.
So
And
I got a question for you. I got a question for you because I don't really run autos. They've always gone straight in the fucking trash. From just because, like as a breeder coming up, that was always if they auto flower, then they're probably going to herm, throw them away. Like that was always kind of the ethos.
Yeah.
But how do you get them big enough to veg? Do you just pull off pre-flowers until they're a decent size and then let them fully flower out?
So I don't have that problem so much. I know that I only want to take like a 1x1 area with them. So a lot of people go opposite with the autos. They want the bigger pots because they can get bigger plants. But I don't want to have to change any of my regime or any shit up. So my regimen. So I run them in 1-gallon pots, and I try to pop an auto for every square foot. I run like my mains. I get some fucking dude. These. I mostly work with just a few breeders right now, just because I know that their shit's fire. Dude, it's been I can't say most of the photo stuff I work with is pretty stable.
But so you just bang a bunch of small plants into one area. So you just have it figured out to a ratio of kind of square footage. You just bang them in and run them as smaller plants and just finish them out as small bonsais.
Small tiny. Yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah, they're maybe 2 to 3 foot tall. Some of the ones that are real big, I'm like, whoa, this is a monster auto. Maybe a little bit bigger than that. But I
kind of need to do that
anyway. What was that?
Yeah, it saves you a bunch of money on veg, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. You don't clone.
If you don't have to spend...
positive and negative. But for me, too, I do that not only because it fits everything, but I'm making these crosses. So I don't want to just, see how a few of the plants express themselves. I want to be able to run, 10, 15, 20 of these at least.
Yeah.
On the low end. And then I'll take my favorite, the one that's going to be strongest first. I'll take that out of my bunch and I'll put that in with my breeding. Same with the male. The males I hunt way different on my photos. Because my autos and photos, my photos, the time frame that before I see pollen is a big thing to me. I know a lot of breeders don't, or a lot of people who cross don't do that, but I really like the 10-week plant. I don't want early pollen. I don't want to shorten my life.
I have to get a specific. So you're talking about the time from seed until it produces pollen, or do you mean from the time the first pods drop to the time there's actually pollen being dropped from the pods? What are we talking about?
Just sexing. Just the time I see the sex where it's hey, this is for sure male. It's building balls.
I got you.
I typically like to wait. I might keep the last few males just to kind of see them. But if you're showing your balls before you go into flower or real fast after you get into flower, I typically throw those out.
So if you're throwing out whole sacks. Yeah, I usually don't keep those guys around either. I mean, like now, if I'm just saying a pre-flower, like that one sack, and that's all I see, and I'm going, weeks into veg, and I've got no problem at that point. He's not throwing like whole nuts from the top of the plant.
Yeah.
Like then, yeah, I'll keep that. Yeah, same. But like the other thing that I've noticed, and this is kind of when we get into like the minutia of like breeding seeds versus like if your only concern is really just what the flower looks like. So like the other thing, like you're saying, how long does it take to produce male bits? But how long from then until he throws pollen? The seeds that are produced from your female, what do the actual seeds look like? How quickly do they develop? Because like when you're running just a bunch of different stuff at once, the one thing you'll notice is that every strain, even if they're similarly related or from the same lineage, or every plant is different in how she handles pollen. So like some females may throw tiny little seeds, some females may throw these big, huge brown mottled seeds. Some may get it done in eight weeks if you're flowering it, if you're dusting it week 3, week 4. Most females that are on the move will get them done in 8, but like a lot need 10, 11, and that speaks to usually how the cross is going to come out too.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of crazy when you get into it because like when you first talk and learn about breeding, nobody really talks about like time frame, and nobody really like. I was told that by a dude that I worked at the shop with, and he's like, well, you gotta look for time frame. You want those. What he told me was, if they're showing their sex last, they're going to be the tallest plant in the field before they release their pollen, and that's a genetic advantage, and that's something that a strong male should have. Is basically what I was always told. I haven't really read that a lot of anywhere, I don't think. And I honestly I couldn't say, oh, this is for sure true. I just kind of followed it, and it's done pretty good for me at least. But with auto flowers, that's not the case, because if you have a 75-day fucking autoflower and now you're all of a sudden making 100-day autoflowers, that's not the direction you're trying to go. Like that's the huge advantage of autoflowers, at least for me. I run a 70-day flower photo. I can pop my shit in there and have, oh my gosh, I have some room in here. I can throw some seeds in there and have them done 5 days after I realize I fucked up. Like, it's just, it's nice. It's nice for me. And I like hunting them, and they've been just super terpy. I've got some people that only want certain ones, and I have to explain to them, listen, I can give you that again, but it's not going to be the exact same flower. You probably won't recognize the difference, but it's not going to be that exact same plant that you got before, because I can't do that with this.
I got another question.
Yeah.
Why do all the auto plants that I see look the same?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Why do all the autoflower plants that I see, almost 90% of them look identical? Like these days when I see an auto and it's just massive, dense-ass nugs with almost no definition, and then I look and it's almost always autoflower. And I'm not hating. I'm kind of coming from a position of somebody who traditionally doesn't have a vested interest in the business. Like I've told people before, I don't mess with autos just because it's not my thing, and I don't really have a passion to put in the time and effort to do it and do it right and to really care about it, just to sling people seeds that like I'm not super proud of.
Sure.
And it's like, if it's not a passion for me, I don't really bother with it. So most of my work is based on stuff that I love and flavors and things that and when it comes to autos, like I get why people like them. I love that there's a market for it and it's a thing, but like, I have to be kind of honest. I'm kind of clueless on the business end of it, of like, what's gone into the gene pool to get it to where it is today, because I know a lot of that has kind of happened from a couple of breeders, and it's kind of exploded from there. At least that was my understanding of it.
There are definitely like, half a dozen very famous autoflower breeders where with the photo periods, it's way branched out. I haven't had the experience of every single autoflower looking the same, but I have been super surprised at how stable their expressions have been. Like the true sense of the word stability in cannabis I get these plants and like they're really hard for me to choose from because they're so similar. And that's why I kind of haven't branched out. I personally have bred with, I think, 4 or 5 different autoflower breeders. That's
So
it. And I'm working on my own conversion right now because the conversions of them is really what I saw. I was like, I want to bring something new. I don't want to use everybody else's shit. Like, yeah, I'm making seeds, and this is a cross of this guy and this guy, or this breeder and this breeder, and it's now, a creation that I made, but it was more intriguing to me to take a photo and make it into an auto and keep the same expressions.
we stepped over a point that we got to address, and it's something that, like, it's a big kind of misconception, misnomer in the weed genes business, the weed seed business, is the traditional understanding of the word stability was that if you ran 10 seeds, 8 or 9 of them would look almost identical. There would be very little variation in the genes. Like it's almost true breeding was almost the old school term. Now, when you say stable to somebody, almost the first thing anybody thinks of is, does it hurt?
Yeah, no harm.
So what percentage does it hurt? Because I'm going to be damn honest with you, man. I don't know that I've met a single strain in the last 100 years, or that's been developed in the last the last 40 years, that didn't have hermaphrodite problems, that didn't have some inherent percentage of hermaphroditism. Now, to what percentage that is debatable. It can be argued. You still there? Did I lose you?
Yeah, you're just cutting out a little bit. I was trying to listen to the parts I could hear.
Oh, yeah. So
if you're talking,
it's inherent to every strain that's been released in the last 2 or 3 decades, or it's been commonly grown. I mean, it's just a matter of to what percentage is hermaphrodite, are your plants going to harm?
Yeah, where is it going to be at in there? That's huge. And that's a big reason too, knowing, so this isn't a very common thing, but knowing how the breeder that you're trying to work with, knowing how they garden can be a big thing. Because if somebody's breeding with something that really loves to be in hydro, like straight hydro, straight water, and you're growing with Pro Mix, fucking BX, and add fucking don't add perlite to it, so it's just gonna hold water like a motherfucker. You might run a perfect garden, and that plant might harm in your garden. It's just like, that's hard. That's one of the reasons, especially with the autoflowers too, that I was like, man, I've been lucky enough not to find very much herm in the autoflower, because my original perception was, okay, I'm gonna have to not only find the males, but the ones that are gonna fucking herm. It hasn't been like that for me so far. Hopefully it stays like that with the ones I've been making. I haven't tested all of them, but the ones that I've tested and I have out there are, I see they themselves are super stable in terms of expression. And they're just fucking, it's wild. I haven't grown a bunch of sours, but the sour from this last male that I used is like, every plant is fucking sour as fuck. And it like lingers on your tongue a little bit. And I can definitely admit that the yield isn't where I'd like it to be, isn't where I'm used to. It's about half of what I'm used to, actually. And I'm still adjusting that. But that's definitely a lot of my fault in there. But the flower itself is very, very good. It's crazy how good the flower is.
Excuse me for being slightly cliche, but I think the other thing that we kind of miss a lot of times is that hermaphroditism in cannabis kind of happens on a spectrum. So most plants will throw male flowers late in flower with even a reasonable amount of true stress.
Yeah,
a lot of plants
absolutely
would do that. Now, there's a big difference between that and a plant that's going to do that on week 2 or 3 of flower.
Yeah,
that's
or worse,
for me
6.
a true hermaphrodite. Yeah, or worse, the middle of flower. But like, or or ones that throw whole branches. You know, it's a female plant with a whole branch of just male. That's another one. But, you know, so it's like it all kind of happens on the spectrum, and we talk about it as, well, the plant herms, it's garbage. It's not always that black and white. Most strains, if you let them go long enough, start to really mess with their nutrients with a hard flush, you really start to give them more or less of what they're used to at the end of flower. Most plants can be induced to throw male flowers. A huge percentage. Huge percentage. It's not that hard. I mean, of anybody's genetics.
No, you're totally right. And more recently to me, it was kind of crazy you brought that up. I had this plant, so I tried to find some sweet tooth for a personal reason. I didn't even hear like the flower was that crazy or this or that, but so I want this sweet tooth. And what was that? Well, I heard that, but then I heard that there's a cat. I think his name was Steve in Canada. That's all I found out. It was like one dude named Steve in Canada.
He used to run Spice of Life Seeds. Spice of Life Seeds. And he was the original breeder of it. Breeder Steve. His name is Breeder Steve.
What the forums, whatever the stuff I found on it said, listen, if you get it, you got to get it from him, not Europe. He's got like the candy sweet, like what you get from a sweet tooth, and Europe was not like that. So I found it crossed a cherry that it was basically like the Hawaiian back cross is basically what it was. But it had the sweet tooth in there. The Hawaiian's a parent of the sweet tooth, and I was like, I'm gonna run it. So I run it. Very tropical plant. I was very happy with it. I only got 2 seeds. Got one to germ. They're old as fuck, apparently, and I was very happy with it. I'm not even fucking kidding you. Day 72 goes from checking the garden, 0 herms seen, to going in there and seeing probably like 3 or 4 dozen bananas starting to poke out all the exact same time. And I was telling myself, like, this has to be based on
always auto flowered on me. I ran a ton of seeds a day. I ran a ton of blockhead. Blockhead to this day is still one of my favorite strains that he put out. It was absolutely amazing, and I still have some like old school blockhead seeds stashed from like very early 2000s that I need to just do something with or throw away, or but like there were a few problems that I always had with the sweet tooth, and I ran it for years. I ran off and on. I ran crosses of it that we did within our friends, and like another friend of mine had a bunch of sweet tooth and blockhead, and I ran a good deal of it. It was almost always unstable. A lot of them would herm badly. The deal breaker for us was when we started extracting it, because it looks so frosty. When you see it, the nugs they looked visually so frosty. But it had smaller trike heads than almost anything else short of Granddaddy Purple that I've ever seen or run. It was at that point where you go, man, and I always joked it was the 90s Blue Dream before Blue Dream was Blue Dream, because it's a very similar profile. It's just kind of generic sweet by the time you're done with it, and then cure it or whatever. It's not really like a knock you on your ass profile. It's a good daytime smoke, as everybody said, which is really polite for saying nobody's going to get high on it unless they're kind of newer smokers. It's not going to throw you off your day. It's not going to wreck your afternoon. And it's the problem with, if we're just comparing those two plants, because in a lot of ways they had a lot of similarities. A lot of the sweet tooth back in the day yielded pretty well, so people would run it in like bushes, and just when you could get a cut that was legit and that didn't have all the problems and that didn't give you headaches, and if you found something, people loved it. People that loved to grow it because it chunked out really hard. The exact same argument about Blue Dream. Everything you can say about Blue Dream, you could say about sweet tooth. And it's the same discussion, except Blue Dream will actually dump hash. It just doesn't melt. Like it's got different size trichomes. So anybody that's ever washed Blue Dream will tell you, indoors or out, it usually throws down. It's just what you get isn't that great. Like it just, once you have to press it into rosin, there's not a ton of oil there, so it's not super terpy rosin. It just comes out with a generic sweet. If you're lucky, maybe a little bit of blueberry, but it's never like super over the top with the flavor, or Sweet Tooth is kind of the same way. It just got beat out by better, more stable, terpier plants. But Bro, the fact that you're even talking about it, the fact that you're even interested in it says a lot because it's got staying power and that it's interested somebody down the line. You
Yeah,
know, there's got
yeah.
to be something there. They
I hope.
always auto flowered on me. I always had a bad problem with them auto flowering, and so I don't really remember it herming really bad, but I always threw the auto plants, the plants that would flower like auto flower and veg. I would throw those out. So maybe that's why I
Yeah,
never
yeah.
really saw a lot of it.
It was, dude. It was. I never had a plant do that. I've seen them pop up here and there. I've never had it just be like the entire plant do the entire freaking thing at the exact same time. It was super weird, but hopefully nice. It smelled really nice. I got to it before any pollen got out or anything, so I was really happy about that. I was gonna cut down a couple days anyway, but but yeah, man, that's I'll have to give it a squish. I have a little coffee press, I don't do a ton with that. But I'll have to give it a squish and see.
Yeah, yeah. My problem with sweet tea, the thing we liked about the blockhead, because the blockhead would at least wash well. Didn't really have
Yeah,
great melt to it, but it always dumped. Excuse me.
that's one
Whereas with the sweet
thing.
tea, what we would get was it was either all stock or it was all 25 mic. Like it was all low bag. It was just the bottom bag would catch all the small heads, and then
Yeah,
there would be very little 70, 90, 120, any of the money bags. And it was one of those things that like, I don't know, man, I never really loved the flavor. Like it was Sweet Tooth was always one of those things. Like I can name 6 strains like that like, the Jack Herrera's, the Golden Goats. There's people that go Ghost Train Haze. There's people that love them,
yeah,
but like, yeah, they just never really worked for me for whatever reason. We always talk about, right, the stuff that you and I love, or whether it's extra stinky stuff, or whether it's, whatever your niche in the market is, sweet strains like that were nothing else, like just kind of generically sweet. Yeah, it
yeah.
just never really, I don't know.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But we
I
used to run oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I'm honestly there with you. Getting into all the strains a little bit deeper and like watching how that particular sweetness, excuse me, a lot of times I hear it described as haze. A lot of times I describe it as haze. Like
Kind of
when somebody
sweet.
says, "Oh
Hey,
yeah, this sweet haze," is that sweetness. It's I personally think it's awesome as like an accent. If you can have a different flavor and then
yeah, I
have that
agree.
sweet
I
haze
agree.
in front or behind that, or at some point along in the joint, or just
Yeah.
somewhere. It's always like you can. A lot of times you when you work with it, you can get it to stay there, or at least when I've worked with it. I've been pretty lucky with a lot of stuff I've worked with. I feel like, but it's all yeah. It's crazy how different. Like you can have some of the man, this is so fire. Everything about this bag I'm loving. And you get somebody and they're just like, nah, dude, I'm not interested. Like, so you're looking for weed and you're not interested in this? It's like, yeah, I don't really like I had 2 sisters and one leads with the funk, the poupine, and the other leans with the fruit. And like to me, they're like exactly the same. That's the only difference is that it was on the
Yeah.
flavor and the nose.
Yeah.
And it was like, I want all of that. I don't even want any of that. Like, I don't like that at all. It's like, okay. Like, to me, it would be completely opposite. And I love both. But yeah, dude, it's going to be fun to see things revolve more into like somebody owning that kind of, not owning like outright, but like there
Right.
being people that can like tie down those flavors and those areas because I don't feel like we have anything like that. I wonder if that would ever happen, right?
Well,
Like,
so like, look, dude, I got this back. I got this hash, and it's a garlic cocktail, right? So if I'm not mistaken, it's a mimosa GMO in some form or fashion. Okay. And so when you smell it, it's almost all citrus and then funk, right? It's got like this top end of citrus, but it's tough to kind of nail down as more than just, it's got like a real limonene top end, but it's got none of that in the flavor profile. The flavor profile has this like grapey vinyl, like fresh pool float, you know, like just out the box vinyl, Foot Locker a little bit.
Yeah.
But not as much DMT. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's this point where Foot Locker, shoe sole, rubber shoe sole, kind of meets DMT. Not quite that spicy, but
Yeah,
more
like
of like
clean
the,
rubber.
vinyl pool float. Somebody's rolling out a big sheet of vinyl, but it's got this almost grapish finish, and you almost don't get any of the funky, like poopy kind of smell that you get when you smell it fresh. And that's
Yeah.
the true thing. Smelling fucking extracts of strains is really the best way to get that true fresh profile, because by the time you dry it, it's not going to have any of that. You know, like by the time you dry it, so much of that flavor and the nuance and the complexities, because there's only, with some of these terpenes, there's such small amounts that by the time you dry it, so much of that either converts to other terpenes or, evaporates, or, it's not present as poignantly present as it is in like hashes and extracts, especially BHO or rosins.
And hash is something I need to learn way more about. But I would guess too that certain
I'll teach you
terpenes.
everything you need to know.
Well, I would guess that certain terpenes will degrade faster with oxygen.
Absolutely.
And so there are certain terpenes that you is the most interesting thing to find those flavors, because you can't take them. They're done after 2 weeks or a week or whatever. And so to find those flavors isolated, kind of, if that makes sense. That would be cool.
Yeah.
Are there any known like that like it's like this dissolves really, really fast? You literally can't get it in flour?
Some are definitely more volatile than others, and then we get into a whole discussion about, we don't entirely know everything that's here, because we're not testing all of these strains. Just because we test it for terpenes, we're not testing for everything that's in that resin. So there's other things, other flavor compounds and all kinds of other things that we're not even really identifying all that often, because we're running terp tests, we're running THC tests, and that's all that gets processed. And that's all I talk about it all the time, but like that's all that's usually required commercially, if that. So it's like, that's why those tests get done, is either for marketing purposes or purely for, state regulatory purposes. But it's almost never like, let's just test this oil and see if we can tell every compound that's in it. We're not really identifying all the stuff that's there. And I think that's why so many people are having a hard time when they try to make like true mimics, like terpene-based mimics of strains, is that there's so much other stuff. It's not just terpenes. Like, you can just mix up terpenes with the exact same amounts as the test shows you, and you're not going to have the same strain.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll sorry. It'll be interesting to see how a lot of that kind of plays out, because really it comes down to the consumer. Like, until we start being like, listen, I want to know more about this, and start asking questions. Like, I don't go to dispensaries very often, but I don't think most people know even like the garden that creates stuff. And so like, I'm sure that there's names on there and shit like that, and maybe people do follow certain gardens that are good. But like, when I see advertisements and shit, it's not saying anything other than a price and maybe THC percentages or like a strain that's on or something, And so maybe I'm just missing the ball there, but we gotta start fucking saying, hey, I want to know more about this. Is this organic? Is this remediated? How old is this? Like all kinds of questions to be asked.
Illinois is still figuring out their legal system pretty heavily, and I still don't think they're quite there. That's just Chicago alone's an area that's had a ton of corruption historically. They don't have enough resources for things like, when you look at personnel to monitor grows and, who's checking in on all these places. But for instance, Denver, the first few years of their legal after they went rec, the first 3 years, you had to kind of know where to shop, because it was all junk. It was all just, early warehouses, throw together a warehouse. And I'll be honest with you, man, back then there was only like 1 or 2 places that you would hear like people that knew about dank weed talking about. You know, they'd be like one of these couple of places. And so within a couple of years after that, you started to really have, you know, I don't want to call them rock stars, but like there were people around town that you knew wherever they were growing was the dank weed. So
Yeah.
there were certain crews, there were hash extraction groups, there were certain growers that if you were in the know, you smoked wherever they were because you knew at the very least things were getting better. You know, they might not be perfect yet, but you knew it was getting better. And 9 times out of 10, man, if you kind of knew a little bit about the garden, the people that grow, these are all people that are usually on Instagram or, you know, on social media. They're people within your community that are growing weed. And you usually run into them if you do events and you do, you know, stuff like that. You tend to run into a lot of the people that actually do the work, you know, not the people that own the company, because if it's not an advertising or a face gig, then they don't usually care. But like, excuse me, by the time, you know, 4 or 5 years had passed of legalization in Colorado, there were definitely places that were known quality-wise to be well above and beyond the rest. And they usually weren't the big places that were just advertising in every magazine, the $3 pre-rolls. It wasn't those sort of places. They were usually high-end, all organic. They usually had the best concentrates. They usually had, you know, and it was worth knowing where those places were because, you know, it's just, they're consistent. Places like that love what they do, there's passion in the product, they handle problems, mitigate problems well, they're worth finding. But it usually takes a few years because the first little chunk of legalization is just a race to the bottom. They don't issue enough licenses right away. Once they do, they issue too many licenses and too much square footage so everybody can just grow as much as they want, and the goal is just to drive the price down as much as possible. So then legal weed becomes almost worthless. You've got packs going for under $100 in some places that have just been sitting for a couple of years. We talked about this on a couple different podcasts about how much of that product ended up getting diverted to, you know, the black market and just ends up getting nixed out of the system. And they say they destroyed it and it goes out the back door. Yeah. And there's so much just boof produced in the commercial market that it's not for a few years of people like you and I who demand more and finally start to be willing to pay a little bit more for product, and then places are willing to, you know, put the focus on growing better product.
Yeah, for sure. And really, it's just I need to do better research and find some places like that around me because I haven't needed that. I kind of run a perpetual garden, and so I haven't really needed that for a really long time. But to explore like the waxes and some of that other stuff, some of those other I should know more, you know, with the plants and with it being so important to a lot of people growing seeds.
Yeah, it is. It is a big chunk of the market. It's a big chunk of the seed buying market because those are the people willing to pop hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seeds to find the 2 or 3 plants that are going to be unbelievable. You know, like, and those are you don't want it to take 300 plants, but let's be honest, making selections for like water hash, it's one of the most difficult things you can possibly want to pick a plant for because there's so many variables. Your trichomes have to be perfect. They have to break perfectly. They have to, you know, if you're washing and then rosin, you have to be able to hold up to the water with enough terps left to be in your finished batch. Like there's so many fine details most people don't think about. As you're a grower, you just want some dank seeds to show to your friends, some dank weed to show to your friends. You'll never consider any of that sort of stuff, you know? For sure. And I still say more than a third of the people that hit me up with a question, it's almost always, if I have to pick one question I get the most is how does it yield? It's almost, you know, and behind that is how does it wash?
Well,
you know.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And then that's just more steps. I mean, it's hard to do that for a garden, let alone go through all of it, wash all of it. Yeah, I mean, because that's the only way to do it, right? You just got to go through it, and then at the end, you fucking test it all.
Yep.
And you say, okay.
I mean, there's a few cheat codes. Like there's a few, if you've been watching resin long enough, you know,
Yeah.
people that handle plants, you can see them. I always joke, if you're trimming a plant and everywhere she goes there's a little pile of keef, you can usually bet that's one that's a candidate. It's not going to guarantee you she's going to get you there, but like if she throws trichomes just casually, like you're just handling plants and dust, trichomes are just dusting off the plants, you can usually bet she's going to wash well. I mean,
Sure.
usually that's kind of a, you know, most of us end up trimming or handling some before we end up washing it. If you just go straight to a wash, now people will do like little jars where you take a measured amount and you just shake a small jar and see how much separates. And you can
Yeah.
kind of get a good idea from that how she's going to act in the wash. You know, like I said,
Yeah.
it's not always a
On numbers.
guarantee. But it'll give you some good ideas of like which ones are going to be better than others. But no, there's no way to tell till she hits the water and the ice. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the true and the true of it. Your eyes are only so good. Sometimes she'll throw, and the finished product isn't that great. So now you got something that's super waxy, and there's a ton of it, but it's not. You're not getting great yields out of it when you press it. You're not. You know, there's a lot of leftover waxes. There's a lot of leftover. And so, once again, I mean, the quality of your trichome has a lot to do with it. But that's why I always tell people if you breed backwards from that theory. So, if I always kind of think about washing hash first, most strains that wash well are going to smoke well. Doesn't mean they're going to have huge nugs, but they're going to usually be better strains to smoke. Almost every strain that I've ever run in my life that hashed really well, especially water hash, those are almost always great strains to just roll up in a joint and smoke because there's so much keef. Like that's, there's just so much resin. That's what we're here for. That's the whole goal, right? Is just resin. The rest of
Yeah.
it is just plant matter. The rest of it is not going to get you high and isn't that great for you to smoke, to be honest. So it's like there's a little bit of like, let's get to the point. The point is hash. The point has always been trichomes, and if we kind of go from that idea to finding plants that are structurally nice, that's easy because there's tons of genetics that are just chunky and big and fat, but finding the ones that'll yield well and that wash well,
Yeah.
that's a tough one. That's
Yeah.
and that's what I'd say. You really get into you kind of have to pick a lane and stick to your lane, you know, because there's other people out there that are passionate about all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Let them be passionate about the other stuff. You love autos. I love that there's people out there that love autos because they scratch a niche for somebody, and
Yeah.
it's something I'm not passionate about. So like to see other people working with stuff that are a distinct lane that's different than the one that I'm in, that's cool for me. Like I love that because the gene pool is bigger, getting bigger in ways that aren't influenced by things that I'm doing, things that aren't my passion, that aren't, my lane. And so I love washing for terpy hash plants. But like somebody else doesn't even understand there's a world of hash out there. And so their main priority might just be this one particular flavor they're in love with. Like I met this kid in Denver some years ago. He had this one strain and he did sift. His thing was dry sift. And his dry sift was some of the best dry sift I had had. And he worked with this Sage Zeta strain. If you're out there, homie, and you remember what I'm talking about, then I'm sorry I don't remember your name off the top of my head. I met a lot of young kids that were very passionate about hash in Denver. But this kid had one strain that he loved, and it dumped sift for him, and he was able to make like some of the most beautiful dry sift, and that was all he cared about. That was what he cared. That was, and he had a lane and he loved it. And that it was some of the best the melty sift that I had had at the time. And it's like, there's so many things that like, you might not even know about. I might not even know about, but somebody out there, it's their favorite thing. And they're coveting and hoarding, the one plant they found of it. And that's awesome because, that thing makes it. Whether it's a clone that survives, whether it's seeds they make, whatever it is, that's out there for somebody else to enjoy. And it meant something to somebody.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's such a wide variation of just everything. most of which probably we don't even know about in there, or at least a lot of which. And it's totally, you're totally right. It's there's so much preference, and we're getting to the point. I think we're in the college phase. A lot of places in cannabis, I think, where like you want the Bud Lights and the ice houses and shit. And we're getting to the point where maybe we're getting to more of the like, or at least what I'm seeing, more of the, hey, I really like this one particular skunky beer. I do like skunky beers, but this is, you know, and we're getting to that point where, or at least around me, and I'm in Michigan, so we're behind California and Colorado and Oregon and Washington and some other places. But it's going to be cool. I'm pretty excited about it, at least.
Well,
It's
see,
going to be
look,
cool to
man,
see how.
if we look at the beer market alone, right? When you look at the fact that I'm gonna piss somebody off here for just a hot take, but I'm a tequila drinker, and I'm one of those people. I drink what I drink, and I've drank across the spectrum. But like the fact that IPAs, something that to me is as bitter as mescaline, like one of the most bitter things I've ever put in my mouth. The fact that that is a whole subculture of people that love
Big one.
that, it's the greatest thing there is to them, and that's beautiful. The fact that that's a thing is, is really a testament to like everybody's got a flavor taste, everybody's got a different thing that they're out looking for, everybody's got a different thing that they can't stand. You know, I never would have thought something as literally the most bitter thing that I can think of, other than IPA, like hardcore IPAs, is probably MDMA or mescaline. Those are two of the most bitter things I've ever. If you've ever eaten cactus, yeah, it's one of the most
Yeah.
bitter things you'll ever put in your mouth ever, and it doesn't go away, and it stays, and it's there, and it's, man, the fact that people love that, and there's a whole subculture of people that just love bitter, super dark, bitter beers. That's great, and that's the way cannabis will end up being once it's as equally legal. As you're gonna have, everybody's gonna have pre-rolls on the shelf. Every pharmacy and big box store, not to name anybody particularly, but everybody will be selling jank pre-rolls and just bars of weed you can't see. There will always be a premium on dank weed and hash. There will always be a premium. There will always be a culture of people that care more about, how it's produced, what goes into it, how it's, the cleanliness of the facilities and the way that it's produced and the way that it's extracted, and all of that matters. All of that will always matter, but you're always going to have, Budweiser will always be a thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there will be that. Yeah,
Coke will always be here,
Yeah, that niche will always. It's just like everything else. There's more next year. There's new freshmen.
Yep, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
With weed, you add not only like a generational type thing, but you add a geographical, where you're like, oh, not only is next year there going to be more people who are going to be medicating or using however you use, but there's going to be 3 or 4 more states where this happened, and 4 or 5 other states where that happened, and it's like it's going to be.
And that's part of the joke of why Blue Dream will always be. There will probably be a Blue Dream cut long past the bombs going off, and there'll be cockroaches, and there will be bed bugs, and there will be mites, and there will be Blue Dream cuts, and it will just be eternal.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that, like, as soon as a new state goes legal, there's a couple million new people that can finally have that awesome strain they saw in High Times called Blue Dream, and and now there's a million new people that can go find that cut and grow it and find out what the rest of us have found out.
At least you're gonna get a lot of weed off of it. If you want to really blast a yield, get yourself a Blue Dream plant, and you will probably do that. But that's about it. From my experience, at least, they're very nice. So Gorilla Glue 4 is one of my favorite plants, and it was similarly easy, I felt like, to grow, but way lankier, not as good of a yield. But man, that plant was like, I always told people you could grow in the back of your toilet. Just make sure you're refreshing the water every now and again. That motherfucker grows. But yeah.
It makes great resin, man. It's got a really unique, like, perfumey, chocolatey thing. And like when you see that, you know what the problem with Gorilla Glue became? It wasn't that the original cut wasn't the most amazing thing, because it's a really awesome strain. The problem became there were so many S1s and GG4 crosses that were not Gorilla Glue that got passed off as Gorilla Glue. And the problem with that one in particular was that everything just got watered down so badly, and most people didn't know if they had the real cut or not. Not that it particularly matters most times, but crosses of that strain are not as good as the original. Like, you really have to kind of do some work with it to find that, like, it's just a perfect convergence of profiles. Like, it's got this really complex thing that is in different directions, and it really is an amazing resin plant too.
Oh, yeah.
But like you said, it gets lanky. You do have to deal with height, but it's such an awesome flavor. But I think, you know, the two things that doomed it were both all the watered down crosses, and the fact that it just didn't cross out well. So then there were all these strains that people would call Gorilla Glue. It's a Gorilla Glue, which is really just some S1 or a bag seed somebody found. It did have slightly hermaphroditic tendencies too. Like, it's not necessarily like a 3-week herm, but if you kind of rocked her late, she would kind of throw a couple flowers here and there. It wasn't unheard of. And that kind of, a lot of the crosses, F1 crosses that I've seen with it, kind of had some problems. Now, I've seen, it's kind of like Deep Chunk in the sense that, like, when you first cross something to it, a lot of those F1s are not going to be great. There's going to be some that are going to be cool, but a lot of them aren't going to be great. You got to get to the F2s and the F3s, and you really start to see, or take that F1 and cross it to something else and get away from that. And the first get away from it and blend in other stuff, you really start to see where it shines in the cross, because it'll bring, Deep Chunk, for instance, will bring down your flowering times. It'll bring down your height pretty drastically. Most of them breed pretty true, so when you start to make F1s, F2s of that, and you start to really see what it, you know, what it can do on a breeding scale. But GG4, I did end up making some stuff that, to me, like, I worked with like a sour something GG4. I'd have to look back. And it was one of those that was super bad that if you touched it, you smelled like it the rest of the day. It wasn't going to wash off you. It just smelled like chocolatey perfume, you know, pretty consistently. And that's all you smelled the rest of the day. If you glanced up against it, the resin was just all over you. But yeah, man, so many GG4, bad GG4 S1s, F1s. Yeah, and now nobody knows what GG4 is anymore. You know, like,
the story is it came from a herm bag, right? It came from a herm bag. Yeah, right. So it's
age old story.
Yeah, you never know with those, but that one's pretty agreed upon from what I've always heard.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. No, nobody knows. If you can't tell me what the mother and the father are, then it was probably a stray herm, you know, especially if it's like that, where it was in a commercial garden or a large grow where all they were growing was flower. Like, their goal wasn't, they weren't doing breeding and stuff like that. Yeah, more often than not, it's from a lady flower or male flower.
Mm.
A lady plant.
Delicious.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one is pretty settled too, of what the actual genetics were. Like, I'd have to go back and look. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say that one it's pretty. The genetics, when you see the profile, the genetics were pretty close to what they said it was. You know?
With your cross, were your seeds really little? I did a GG4 cross, and I did it once, and like the seeds were so little. It was recent that I tried to I popped some, thinking like there's no way these pop in, and every single one of these little fuckers came up.
So when I think I did one round of crosses with the GG4, but the other one that I worked with that was decent was like another cross somebody had done with GG4, and then I hit it to my Royal Goo. So it was more of, I didn't work directly with GG4 on that one. I had it was a sour something GG4. And so it wasn't, the one time I did actually make seeds with Gorilla Glue, yeah, they came out really tiny. I worried something was wrong with the plant or it wasn't healthy because they were so small that you almost wonder if it wasn't like a dud plant or, something else. But yeah, I do remember the one that I made, the one time I made crosses with GG4, it didn't go well.
Wow,
They were
dude, I'm
super,
glad.
super tiny.
I'm glad you had that experience because that's literally I was sitting there. I was like, man, this GG4 I usually smash. It's going in here for, and it didn't like for me. It didn't like being pregnant. Like I noticed that it was like sick. It looked sick. I couldn't get it to be like really happy in there, and I didn't have any problem with any other plants. And then the seeds were little, and I was like, I thought that I don't know what the fuck's going on with this plant. I did
Yeah, yeah.
something,
That's what I
but
said, man. That's one of those things in breeding most people don't think about is like some strains just don't make good seeds. Some females just don't make good seeds. So like
yeah,
it's not something you think of to select for, but once you're pulling from a large enough, what's up guys? Once you're pulling from a large enough gene pool, then you can say, okay, well, this one just throws tiny, tiny, tiny seeds. I'm just not going to fuck with it.
yeah, yeah,
It might have everything else going for it, but if you're using it for seed production and it doesn't at least produce seeds that are decent, fat, healthy, and happen in a reasonable time frame, what's
yeah.
the point? Like, like that goes a long way too, and just like how long those seeds are going to be viable, because teeny
Yeah.
tiny seeds like that don't last at all. Like they just don't. Couple years and they're done.
Nobody wants to get even if you're selling packs of 100. Nobody wants 100 two-time poppy seed looking little fucking
Yeah.
seeds. People don't like even white seeds anymore. You could some plants just make way lighter seeds, and sometimes they're just not very dark, and it's just that mom or maybe even the dad. I don't even know. Probably the mom, I'd imagine. But I don't breed the same male twice ever, so it's hard. I don't know a lot of that kind of like if this come from the dad, this come from the mom kind of shit. Um, but I've gotten really light colored seeds. I just don't put them on the market to
Yeah,
say
right.
I'll fuck with
That
them, and
happens
I just
too.
like I'm just not gonna put these out there because people aren't gonna be happy about them. I think they're gonna grow great plants. I just
One
this is what it
of the things
is.
that
Why my ass
we got like 3 minutes left, just a heads up. Something somebody just asked, does anything different need to happen when you're growing for seed, females for seed, as far as nutrients? So one thing that I've noticed, aside from just having a balanced nutrient, making sure that all your bases are covered and you've got an even amount of what you need going into flower, I still treat them just like I treat my flower plants. Week 3 I boost PK about mid seed production. So after you pollinate around week 3 or 4, I'll bump a little extra potassium towards the middle and end. But that's about it. I mean, like I generally treat my seed plants the same way I would treat my, flower producing plants. Yeah,
I
I don't
read
do anything
somewhere they like
seriously
boron.
different. Boron?
Yeah, I read. I do have to sit here trying to think of where I read somewhere they like boron, and I found I had like a bag of these samples, and they were like a tea mix. And so I've used. I'm almost out of them actually. I'm gonna have to find something, but I don't know if it helps or not because I read that and I didn't honestly really notice the difference. But
Most balanced nutrients should have most of your micronutrients. We always joke. It depends on, once again, how you're growing. Like if you're growing all organic, then it's into you to get all that into your soil and make sure it's all balanced and all that. If you're using something out of a bottle, 99% of the time, most of your micronutrients are there in reasonable amounts that your plants are going to need. That's what's so funny about the joke about CalMag. Like while cannabis specifically does like magnesium and calcium, they're both basic building blocks of a decent nutrient regimen. They're micronutrients. They're not something that, you don't need them in super high amounts. It's not something that you should be injecting with needles into the base of your fucking stems. Like, a little bit of
unless you
calcium and
want
a
the
little bit of
giant
magnesium,
awesome buds.
you're good. Good. I do joke though. I've seen people do some of the trippiest stuff, man. Like I said, I worked at a commercial place one time. The last week of flower, he would have people drill screws into the base. Anyway.